Melody Shou. Oh, thank you. This movie is so beautiful, huh? And I'm so honored to be here. Melody Shou, I'm an executive editorial director at People Magazine, and we're going to hear a bit more about the film from our director, Eric Lin. Of course, producer and the star of the film, Lucy Liu. Co-star Lauren Shou. Just wanted to start off by congratulating the three of you on this beautiful work of art. It's so meaningful to everyone in this room in the AAPI community, and we saw the mental health resources right outside. So. Especially after the events of this weekend, it's just so important to have work like this, so congratulations. And I know this is such a passion project, and what's incredible is that this was a first milestone for all three of you on the stage. Your first directorial debut, Lucy, your first solo starring role, and Lawrence, your first feature film, which is so mind-blowing. What is it like to check off this particular milestone when a project is so meaningful to you and you worked on it for years and years? So Eric, I'll start with you.
First of all, thank you everybody for coming out to watch the film in the theater. This film has been a long time in the making, and it means so much to be able to share it with you all. It's funny. It was not. It sort of was not on my checklist to check off. I have a career as a cinematographer, and but I felt compelled to tell the story because Manette Louis, one of our producers I've worked with, I've shot a couple of features for her. She had sent me the script that Marilyn Fu wrote based on Frank Schoen's LA Times article. And when I read it, I just was completely, I found it completely devastating. I could see my own family inside their story, and the emotional logic of lying to protect each other, to how the stigma of mental illness could drive them to isolate themselves from the very people that could help them. I felt all that deeply because I had friends and family who also struggled with their mental health, and I could see how, as immigrants, how my family dealt with it and how families I know dealt with it. And so, it felt like it's also a story, we had never seen on screen before, so it felt like an urgent story that, I could tell honestly and truthfully. And so I really, felt deeply passionate about, sharing it.
And like you said, we see so many facets of Lucy in this film, and you really got to dig into this character. What was it like for you to really embody Irene and have to show both her humanity, the horrific act, of course, at the end, but the overarching feeling I think everyone sees is the love she has for Joe? How did you portray all these different parts of her?
Just because this is a woman that, and a family that existed. And I think there's an importance of the, I guess, not the headline, but the humanization of what happened and why it happened. And also understand that she felt like she made the best choice. And I think, we never know, we have to kind of read between the lines to understand why she did this. And I know that, as a child of immigrants, that, there's so much struggle that goes on between, having a child, also navigating the world in a different language, and also being received by the world when you speak a different language. And that vulnerability is something that we often don't see. We see the result, or we judge the result of it, and I think it's important to know that she was so alone, and she was so lonely when she made this choice. And I can't imagine, how she must have felt when she did it. And it breaks my heart to know that she brought this child into the world and had to take him out in that way because she thought it was the way to protect him. And I think both of them were trying to protect each other, and they weren't really communicating. And I think the stigma of mental health and about not telling somebody something because you want to make sure that they don't get hurt, and in the end you're hurting each other. And that was something that I said, we need to value communication more, and to also understand that our parents aren't going to change overnight. So how can we, pivot and open up the conversation, but don't, necessarily think it's gonna just, we're gonna flip the switch and everything's gonna be different. And I think that understanding my parents and knowing them, I don't expect them to maybe receive it the way that, younger audiences might, but they might find it really shocking. And I think that this movie's not about shock value, it's about the value of bringing it forward towards, our generation now and for ourselves to understand that there's a social, emotional component that we're missing from our culture that we need to imbue. And really doesn't mean we have to leave behind everything else.
And you talked about the vulnerability in the film, and Lawrence, your performance is incredibly vulnerable, and I cannot believe it's your first feature film. The talent is so great, and you self-taped your audition, is that right? Yeah, what was it like to be on this set? I'm sure there were so many firsts you were learning for the first time, and can you talk about the safety that Eric's said, and Lucy being your co-star and producer helped create an environment for you?
Yeah, like you said, I think there were a lot of firsts for me. In fact, I think most of them were firsts. Just acting and being on set and seeing how everything worked and doing the prep with Eric and doing rehearsals with Lucy, that was all very new for me. And so I spent a lot of time learning and soaking up knowledge. And I think, I kind of had to as well, just with the nature of this film and just how deeply emotional and heavy it is as an actor and as a human being going through and being in that headspace and acting these scenes out. It is a challenge and it can be scary at times. So obviously having a community there, people who supported me and believed in me, was very important. A big part of the safety that I felt working with Eric was just how much he believed and how much he supported me and how much he was willing to take the time to make sure that I was okay. Not just when we were on camera and when we were doing the scenes, but also when we went home and the cameras weren't rolling. Both Eric, Lucy, and our incredible producers and crew, they all, I almost call them my family because they were my family those months that we were shooting, because they went out of their way to take care of me and make sure that I felt comfortable, I felt safe, and obviously Lucy going through those scenes with me, being my co-star, leading me, helping me, supporting me, encouraging me when I needed it, and also letting me know that I can go home and I can decompress, I can let go of the character. That way I don't have to live with it constantly and feel this burden over me every single day, night in and night out. But that I can go home and be myself again. That was also an encouragement and a safety for me as well. And so I thank both of these people as well as our producers and the people who couldn't be here today. I thank all of them because I wouldn't be here without them.
The three of you have said the hope is that this film opens the door to tough conversations that might not happen without art like this. I'm curious, in the last 6-7 years we're working on it, did you personally have conversations with your loved ones or family because of this film that may not have happened without working on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the act of making this film allowed these conversations to happen. Even within the 7 years of developing it, but also even when we were on set, there were crew members who, as we were shooting scenes, they're like, this happened to my friend, my brother, my sister, and that even that was like an incredible thing. Just like the act of making it was allowing these conversations, in this small community of filmmakers who was on the crew to open up. And then to see, what's been incredible about sharing the film is the conversations we've had with audience members, with mental health organizations who are doing the hard work, out in the community, and how this film can hopefully, bring to light kind of the barriers that people have to seek out mental health. So much of the tension of the film is Irene trying to prevent the knowledge of Joe's condition getting out into the world friends, with the community, with the schools, and so just showing the tragic logic of where that ends up was something that we hoped would allow conversations like the one we're having up here to expand into the audience as we share the film.
And what's also special about this film is that I'm not sure everyone in the crowd knows, but all the above the line creative leads were Asian American, which is so rare. And Lucy, we've seen you in huge blockbusters, hit action, Hollywood film. What was different about having this all Asian creative lead? Did it make the set feel different for you and the process as a producer?
It did, and it was so wonderful. We did have our, as he likes to label himself, token white producer that actually bought the, yeah, I'm standing right there. It's hiding in plain sight. But he was the one with Theo James who bought the article from the LA Times in 2017, and the article, is something that, I guess for me, hearing the language that I spoke when I was a child really brought a great deal of warmth and vulnerability to the set, and a very comfortability that I think I haven't felt before, because you're speaking English, and you sort of become sort of in that sense arrested development, because you stop learning Chinese and then you start to immerse yourself in the place because you want to belong, and then you don't belong there, and you don't belong here, and then you're like, where do I belong? And I think that for Irene, she was somebody who was from another country, and the fluency and the joy and I guess the humor and the nuance that she had with her son at home and at the beach, and that there's a relationship there. You see her personality, but when she goes out into the world and she's talking to the therapist, or to the doctor, or to the school, or to the police, it's much more halted, and you don't see her personality. She seems distant and cold and fragmented, and I think the incongruity of her life at home and her life outside creates a great impasse for how to connect the dots. And I think I guess that's something that was really important to me when I was laying the groundwork for the character, because I wanted to show her the lack of comprehension when she was outside the house. And so the interiority of her character was quite hidden, and I think that's an important part of our culture that I grew up with. My parents would never ask me, about how I was feeling. And I think, in general, we've talked about this in the past at other panels, where in Chinese, you don't necessarily say, how are you? You just say, 吃饭了没有, which is like, did you eat? So it's like, it means everything. It means like, how are you? How's it going? You look good, or you don't look good, and you need to eat. But like, did you eat is like the way in. And I think that's very similar to a lot of communities, right? But it's literally the way you greet somebody at the door almost, And so it's not about like, how do you feel? I think knowing that and understanding that is also a very important way for us and younger generations to know that we have to be the ones to advocate for ourselves and just say, I'm feeling like, I don't know how I feel right now, but I don't feel great. And I think it's hard for parents to receive that and because they want to fix it, they want to, put a Band-Aid over it, and sometimes it's just about talking about it. And, our family wasn't a talking culture, it was a survival culture. And I think we come from that. And so to sort of answer your question, which I completely forgot already, sorry guys, it's something that I think is Irene's, struggle is with the language and belonging, and then also like trying to hide and protect her son, and the language barrier between her, him, and the world is like a confluence of things that created this unfortunate, this tragedy.
We get a lot of insight into what Irene is thinking, I think, and struggling with. A little less from Joe's character. Was that intentional, and how did you approach that, Lawrence, where you play the emotional depth so so well, and you can feel that struggle, but it's almost like he struggles obviously to voice everything he's feeling. What part of that really resonated with you, and maybe, you know, your upbringing in terms of wanting to protect your mom, but also you're deeply, you know, fractured yourself?
I think that's just a part of growing up. You know, when you're young, you don't know how to vocalize a lot of things you're going through. And it's even harder, I think, when you have so much trauma and a mother who doesn't understand what you're going through, and a community who isn't willing to accept or nurture you. And so Joe was missing so many things, and as a result, he did not know how to say or to communicate the things that he was going through. So he just kind of dealt with him the best way he knew how, which is kind of how I sometimes dealt with my problems growing up, and that's just to suffer through it. You know, don't talk, don't look at anyone, don't try to burden anyone, just sit there and deal with it. And that's very, very tragic. You know, Irene was also going through that as well, although obviously, you know, I think she also had some friends who were checking in on her, and you know, she was also, obviously she was a little struggling just as much as Joe in that, you know, she's an immigrant, she doesn't quite have a community here, and she, you know, she doesn't speak the language, so there's that barrier. But you know, she has her friend, and she can speak a little more about it as an adult, but I feel like when you're a kid, it's even more like you just feel trapped. And I felt that so many times growing up, where I would deal with something, or I would struggle with something, and it just became this thing that I had to deal with myself. And I didn't know how to talk to my parents or my friends about it. You know, you talk to your friends, like you don't talk to your friends about mental health, you know, like, I mean, I see a lot of young people in the audience like me, like you talk about like video games or school or whatever. You don't talk about like your struggle, especially if it's something that's really, really heavy. Like I'm terrified right now. You don't speak to that. You know, maybe if you have like a really, really close friend, but Joe didn't have that, and so he just suffered and he struggled and it was just internalized. And I think the movie kind of captures that, where he doesn't. You know, even when he was opening up in that one scene where he was joking around with his friend, even when he was opening up, he still didn't know how to really talk about it. He was jumping around, like you could see him trying to, but he was still holding it in. And that's very real, and it's very, 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 very sad for me. I feel a lot of sadness for people who go through that, and I hope that we can communicate with these young men and young women who are going through these things, because I think it's so, so important.
Lucy, I love that you said the language, speaking in Mandarin on set helped feel a little bit of that home. Watching it, I totally felt the same way, and seeing Rosemead, and I say in quotes because you had to film a lot in New York because of financial reasons. Can you speak a little about having to do this totally across the country in an entirely different weather that you would have planned for out here, and how you brought certain parts to life, and what challenges you had to overcome?
Yeah, it's very tricky. So we shot 4 weeks in New York in February, in the winter, all interiors, which is a challenge. And then we did a week here in LA for the exteriors and the motel scenes. And yeah, it's both for schedule reasons and tax reasons. And it was incredibly challenging. You know, like we just, like I grew up in Southern California, so, and you know, every weekend my parents would drag us to San Gabriel Valley, Monterey Park. So I had a real sense memory. You know, I went to that mall that we shot in all the time. And so, you know, I had a real sense memory of what, you know, Southern California would be like, you know, and the places that we needed to shoot. And how to find stuff like that that matched in New York was really challenging, but we found like the house in Bayside, Queens. You know, we found like the print shop closer to Long Island. So we had, but you know, it was these things like the print shop, you know, the fact that it had like a parking lot in front of it was massive for us. Like, oh my God, you can park, you know, we can park cars there. That's just like California, it's amazing. But you know, if you know, look closely, there's like some dead trees in the distance. But you know, these were the things that we had to like cheat around, you know, and we had to really like put a magnifying glass to the script to like what can we get away with in New York and what could we, you know, we absolutely have to have in California. You know, like the beach scene was amazing, and like that was always going to be something that we had here. You know, there was ideas of like changing that so we could shoot in New York, but there's, you know, the emotional power of them being out there and seeing that was, you know, we wanted to maintain that. But so that was like the trickiness, was about what could we get away with in New York, you know, because the more we could shoot there, the more it helped us, you know, schedule budget-wise. But there were things that we had to hold on to in California, you know, obviously the motel and the beach and all these exteriors in the San Gabriel Valley and Rosemead were so essential to us. And so we knew these were the things that would, you know, maintain the truth of it, and then what were things that we could get away with in New York. Yeah.
Well, that area means so much to a lot of people, and I
Yeah.
think you did a fantastic job considering the hurdles you had to overcome. Before we wrap, is there any message you really hope people, you know, walk away after, let it sit with them a bit?
Well, I just wanted to say that we shot this movie in 21 days. And Eric did an incredible job as a first-time director and led the charge. And it's been a real effort. I mean, it's a very light word, really, how to describe. Maybe it's just been an aging process. This is like, it's an anti-aging, this is an aging process. But it's been so worth it because we don't have a story like this. We have so many stories like this that are not, I guess, now on celluloid or available, and we hope that it will give people a sense of not being so lonely. And you know, I know that when I was growing up, there was like only 3 channels at the time, in a box, you know, you had to turn it. And I really was looking for something or someone that I could connect to. And I think we all struggle with so many different things. And we want this to be something that is going to help somebody link themselves to another bridge. Because it's like every day is like one step forward. And we don't want this to be a movie about, it's not an issue movie. This is a movie that happened, you know, to a family, and we want it to be something that like charges you forward, you know, towards life and not away from life, and to like bring joy and see, you know, the dimensions that we have and the help and the outreach and the community that you can build within your own home and your own friends group. And if it's not the right group, then maybe it's time to pivot, you know, because the judgment, the social media, the presentation of what everyone wants to seem like, it's just too much to keep up with. And I think it's very difficult for adults, young people, everyone, you know, and that's why like Australia's like, you know, 16 and under, no social media. And it must be because they've seen really tragic events happen. You don't just put a law out like that, you know, haphazardly. They must see something very damaging to know that is creating a high suicide rate. And we don't have that in America to protect us because it's about capitalism. And sometimes we forget it's not just about money, it's about life and about caring. And we're just losing that aspect of ourselves. And we want this to be like more than just tape. We want this to be an actual foundation, like maybe the first layer of it. Because I didn't have this, we didn't have this, and we deserve this. You know, and it's not about deserving, it's like we've earned this. We've been in this country for a very long time. All of us, all of our communities, no matter what culture you come from. And we deserve to have this connection. Yes, we deserve all of the fun martial arts and entertaining, you know, like Marvel, all of the Avatar, you know. But we also deserve this, and we've earned this right to have this connection with each other. And, you know, technology has been a really beautiful way to, like, accelerate, but we're losing a sense of, you know, who we are and who each other are. So we hope that this is going to bridge that gap by, you know, laying down something, the first layer.
For making this film and the passion that's so clear that you all put into it, and for being here today to talk to us a little more. And before they head out, if everyone